there and welcome back to my channel. I have been using my baking center for 8 months now and I will be refreshing it today with some new jars that I found. So let's get started. And make sure you watch to the end because I do a delicious pumpkin cookie recipe that you're going to want to try. Here's a quick look at my baking center before I did a makeover on it about 8 months ago. It needed a lot of help. I'll post a link at the end of this if you want to go back and look. And here it is finished. It worked really well for me for a really long time, but there were certain things that just weren't working right. So time for a refresh. Besides that, I was cleaning out my storage and I found these awesome Apothecary Jars that I forgot I had, and I really wanted to repurpose them on this cabinet. My supplies were also getting really low and we're getting into baking season, so it was a great time to just do a whole refresh. I have been wearing an apron a lot lately. It just has saved a lot of my clothing. I kept getting stains all over the front of my clothing, so this European style one is a favorite. I'll see if I can find a similar one and link it below. I always try to keep all the basics well stocked: brown sugar, flour, bread flour, and so on. It did take me a few minutes to figure out which supplies I wanted in each jar, but I got them all sorted by size and then decided which ones I use the most of. The only drawback to these jars is they're not super well sealed, but I like the look of them, so I decided to put the products in them that I use really regularly so that they stay fresh. The ones that I put in sealed jars were things like baking soda and baking powder, or just ones that I don't use as often. I've had these Apothecary Jars for a really long time, but I actually found a very similar one on Amazon, and I'll drop a link for that below as well. I'll go ahead and speed this up here. If you want to follow along, that's great. If you want to jump ahead to my cookies, that's fine too. But enjoy me organizing and refreshing my baking center and getting it ready for the holiday season. now that I'm all organized, let's go ahead and get baking. This Pillsbury recipe book is by far my favorite baking cookbook. Do we call it a cookbook when it's for baking? Anyway, you need it. I dropped the link below and I highly recommend it. It is an older one, but a lot of my favorites are in this book. I don't know what it is about an actual cookbook and cooking out of that. I actually prefer that over doing it online, although I do both, but maybe it's just me. Anyway, I'll also link the recipe below if you want to just go look that up as well. I did make a couple changes just for preference, but I will put that in the description box below as well. I always like to gather all of my tools before I get started, so here are my measuring cups. Actually didn't need all of these, I put a few back, and some measuring spoons. We'll go ahead and start with sugar. And then next up is brown sugar, well packed. Next up is the butter, which is supposed to be at room temperature. I cheated and put it in the microwave, just being honest. Not always good at planning ahead for that. But I will tell you a tip that I use all the time and love and keeps me well organized in my baking is using a bowl or some sort of container that I put all of my garbage and scraps in as I go, and then I can just take it over to the sink when I'm done. So this little bowl, I'm just putting the papers in there, and then yeah, it just helps keep me organized and keep my counter clean as I go. Does anybody else have a really old KitchenAid? I love mine and she's still going really strong, and I have not been disappointed in this. So I have kind of thought about painting it or refinishing it somehow, just because it's just still running well. But we'll see, maybe that'll be a future video. Next up, I'm gonna add the whole can of pumpkin. Make sure it's not pumpkin pie filling. This is actually just pumpkin. Next up, I'm adding an egg, and I'm sorry this is off to the right so far. I wish I would have had my camera centered. Obviously, YouTube newbie here. But you can enjoy looking at my new jars, which I'm really loving. Hopefully you are too. Now I'm gonna go ahead and add the vanilla. I do like to scrape down the sides just to make sure everything is combined fully before I add the dry ingredients. So this is what I'm doing here. So next up, I'm adding in the flour. I will say these jars are so much easier to scoop in than those angled jars, so very, very pleased so far with the change. So next up is the soda or baking soda, baking powder, and salt. And I do like to mix those all together and then put it in with the flour a little bit so it just spreads out evenly throughout the dough. So I will say this recipe was pretty basic as far as the cookies go. I've made other breads and cookies like this, but the winner on this is the frosting by far. Oh, and I forgot a little bit of cinnamon too. Next up are the nuts. You can use either pecans or walnuts for this recipe. And I'm gonna use my handy dandy, very old vintage nut chopper. I don't know if you can still get these. I'll see if I can find a link for that as well, but if you can, highly recommend. Or just start hunting for one at a thrift store or secondhand shop. Some of the really old kitchen appliances just can't be beat, and this is one that I use quite often. Now the recipe does call for 3/4 of a cup of nuts. I actually would have done more, and I will make note of that for the next time I make this recipe. I would probably do closer to a cup just for my preference, but it felt like there wasn't enough. All right, now that it's well combined, I just was scraping it off the sides, and I did think that it was a little bit too wet or sticky, but it ended up coming out just perfect, kind of a spongy cookie. So yeah, stick to the recipe on that one. So let's go ahead and scoop them out and get them on a cookie sheet. Obviously I had preheated my oven, 350, and I'm gonna go ahead and use one of my cookie scoops. Again, highly recommend that. I'm gonna put a lot of this stuff in my Amazon storefront if you want to see some of my baking center essentials, so I'll add a link for that as well. I thought these might be too small, but it is what they recommended, and the first batch I did just like this, and they came out good. I did end up trying to add more the second batch, and I wouldn't recommend that. So stay small. They're just a good, rich little cookie, perfect with coffee and stuff. So I would say definitely this scoop is a perfect size. I'll go ahead and speed this part up. And now let's go ahead and get them in the oven. The recipe said 10 to 12 minutes. I tried 10 minutes, but that didn't seem like enough. It was closer to 11 or 12 that ended up being better. And now through the magic of editing, here they are. Perfect little pumpkin cookies. Now the spatula I'm using right now, for some reason, out of the 4 spatulas I have for baking, couldn't find any of them. This one is not recommended. It's just what I had on hand, and it is great for flipping a grilled cheese sandwich, but not so great for cookies. They kept pushing them around on the tray. So no, I will not be linking this one below. So next up is the frosting. I melted brown sugar and butter on the stovetop and got it kind of to a paste, kind of a thick paste. And then I let it cool for 10 minutes, I think is what it recommends, and just added the milk. So I just started spreading this around and thinning it out a little bit. I could not get the video uploaded that showed an above shot that I took that was a little bit more obvious, the consistency, but you just want to get it to a place where everything is thinned out and no grains are in there, kind of like the sugar is melted into the milk, or dissolved into the milk. In fact, here's proof that I actually tried recording it for you, but yeah, I couldn't get it to work. Okay, now that I have everything dissolved really well, I'm going to add the powdered sugar. Now it said 1.5 to 2 cups. I definitely recommend the 2 cups for my taste, but I just didn't like it runny. I wanted it a little bit thicker, more like a frosting than a drizzle. But yeah, I did 2 cups. Next up, I'm going to use my handy dandy mixer. This is just a single mixer. I use this all the time. I tried replacing it with a new one once and it just did not do what it should. This one's old and it's just running well. It looks like that's kind of a theme with my appliances. When you got something good, you just keep it going as long as you can. So I'm just mixing this on low, trying not to create too much powder dust, but adding a little bit more here to thicken it up a little bit. And again, going to speed this up for you. You can see here it's still a little bit runny, and so I decided to stick it in the refrigerator because it was still warm. And I just wanted to get it to a temperature that I could spread it easier. All right, now on to frosting them. It was the exact amount needed. I didn't put it on too thin or too thick, and I could not find my special little spatula, so I had to use a knife, but I did have a small spreading knife that I love for icing and highly recommend it if I could find it. But anyway, a knife will do if you have to. So now the real decision is, do I share some of these or keep them all for ourselves? That's a tough one. After you taste them, you'll know why I said that. I put them on this cute little pumpkin tray, and the frosting does harden up. I didn't want to stack them at this point, but here is one open. They're just light and fluffy and kind of cake-like. The pumpkin flavor is really light, and then that frosting though is so good. And one more look at my baking book in case you missed it early on. Again, link is below. Okay, that's all for now, guys. Thank you for watching, and I hope you were inspired.
Also, make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss out on any of my future content.